Okay, welcome back. Let's talk about the visits that we have with patients every 7 sessions to keep them engaged in care and keep them excited to see what their trend graphs hold, and reminding them that the improvements that they are seeing in their life are directly correlated to these trend graphs, which show improvements in brain performance. Okay, so let's talk about those sessions. Those visits every 7 sessions are 5 minutes. If you're good at time management, this will be no problem for you. They really need to be brief because they're just supposed to be checkpoints to continue to establish and maintain rapport and give them just a soundbite of information on their progress. During the progress meeting is when you will go over those graphs in more detail over the course of a half hour. We try to make those meetings 15 minutes, but they really end up being closer to a half hour. Okay, so, and you could have a staff member do them if you trained your staff member well enough. Okay, so every 7 sessions, let's think about that. You want, again, to say, okay, you're still showing a really remarkable response to training within this session, and you, as the practitioner, should have looked back at the last graph you shared with them so that in your mind you can tell them how this current graph is better than the last one that you shared with them. You don't have to share the last graph with them because that would take a lot of time. So you can just say, remember last time we spoke and I showed you your first session and those levels of delta and theta really started so high, over 50. Now we're seeing them start at 30. That's a significant reduction in too much slow speed. Your brain is getting stronger and we're wiring in that new, better brain pattern. Boom, done. And that's enough information. It's just enough information to tell them this thing is working for you. I can see it in the graphs, and is it showing up in your life? And then they'll tell you the qualitative behavioral aspects that they're seeing. And of course, right now we're talking about the best case scenario where someone is performing and feeling better and you're seeing improvements in the graph. Let's talk real quick about what if the graphs are not showing improvement, or what if the person isn't seeing that show up in their life. Okay, number one, let's talk about if the person isn't feeling and performing better, but you see the graphs getting better. Sometimes this will happen, and I tell people, and if once you have enough experience of your own in this department, you can just look a person in the eye and say, as long as I'm seeing improvements in these graphs, the benefits will show up for you. Sometimes you have to probe people a little bit further because they actually are seeing improvements. They just don't know that they are. So if you ask them a penetrating question about something you knew at the beginning of their care, like, is your son still having tantrums? They'll go, actually he's having less and they're shorter. And remember, if you have them establish 3 goals at the outset of care, you can keep them fixated on those goals instead of just on life in general. So that's the case scenario if they don't see it showing up. Sometimes you can help them see where those benefits really are showing up because it's subtle at the beginning for sure. But if you see it in the trend graphs, they're going to be experiencing it along the way at some point, hopefully sooner rather than later. But what if you don't see improvements in the graph and they're not seeing the benefits? Really, in my experience, the only time that really happens is like something is going on in that person's life. And that can be different for all people, but let me just give you one example. And this actually happened for 2 children this past fall when the kids started with us for care for neurofeedback, and then they went back to school. And the school environment is a very challenging environment for them. And basically, they were not being successful in the school environment. One child really has significant ADHD, and we see improvements in the graph, but he's spiraling out of control in the classroom. Tons of emails from the teacher, bad behavior, et cetera, et cetera. And the mom's like, why is he doing this if you say he's getting better in the graphs? And the answer is he is stuck in a negative feedback loop at school. So he needs accommodations to make that environment easier for him. And science proves that kids that have an ADHD brain, when they're put into a difficult learning environment, that pattern goes on steroids. It becomes worse. So that's happening for this kiddo all day, every day over a 3-month period. And then I have a check-in and I see every 7 sessions, those graphs are looking a little bit worse. And now it's 3 months later and he is not doing any better. The graphs are looking worse. Something has to change in his life. And for that child in particular, it's the school environment. So I told the mom, get with the school, find out exactly what these behaviors look like, and I will help you figure out how to put accommodations in place. For another person, there is an adult who we are working with. They have been under major stress, under a deadline, trying to get a project done for work. So basically their anxiety is ramping up. I can see it training well in the sessions, but the high beta, the anxiety itself, is increasing. That doesn't have to do with neurofeedback and how it's working for them. It's that now, in both cases, the brain is having to swim upstream or climb uphill. We're training against the curve because things are getting worse in that person's life. So be acutely aware of that, and you can help people understand that. And I tell people this all the time. I know you might not be able to fathom this, but without neurofeedback, your experience could be a lot worse than it is, because I see this strong response to training. So as your child's theta is going up all day in the classroom, he comes in here and we're reducing it. So his behaviors actually might be worse if we weren't doing that. Same thing for the person with anxiety. We're combating that anxiety, but we're not making a ton of forward progress, which is what people want, but I'm kind of helping to hold them steady. But you can use the graphs to think about that with a person. And you're going to do that every 7 sessions so that it doesn't happen that a person comes in for their full 39 sessions and you've never checked in with them, and that's happening in the background. You need to stay on top of that so that you can stay in conversation and keep engagement going. And in those 2 cases, people now know that things are going on in their life that is making their training difficult. And I've given them advice on how to handle that, but they are acutely aware of it. So if we get to the end of their program and they haven't made as large of gains as they hope to, I was very transparent about that at session 7. So it's very, very helpful too as you go through a person's program for yourself. Okay, that's every 7 sessions. Stay tuned because I'm going to give you the next awesome office process to keep your patients engaged and happy.